Welcome to the License to Lead podcast. I'm Patty Fay. This podcast is for physicians or anyone who thinks healthcare needs a transformation led by physicians. License to Lead means that physicians are charged with and must be in charge of guiding the vision and the culture of healthcare systems. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the License to Lead podcast. I am down on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico and in portable podcast mode, so you might notice some variation in the sound quality. As a Mother's Day gift to myself, both episodes of the License to Lead podcast in May feature my daughters, but never fear, we will stay on topic with physician leadership and physician culture. In today's episode, my daughter Jamie Katuna and I are interviewed by prolific podcaster and RN Keith Carlson. He hosts the Nurse Keith podcast. Last November of 2020, we were guests on his, get this, 295th episode, for crying out loud. I'll provide a link in the show notes and in the License to Lead newsletter. Wait, what? You didn't know there's a newsletter? Race to the fakeconsulting.com homepage where you can actually sign up for it. And for a small fee, really small, zero actually, I'll even send you back issues. So I asked Keith if I could have my way with his audio of Jamie and me, and he said yes. So this is an edited version. We dive into what it's like to share a career path, the passion we both have for great culture, how we've influenced and inspired each other, some of the psycho stuff that trainees, doctors, and nurses deal with in healthcare when it's led by people with a passion for profits, not patients. And we dip a toe into the neuroscience of leadership. Jamie also prods me into telling the tale of the best ICU nurse ever, my friend and former roommate during my internal medicine residency. This story was one of several things that downright amazed me that Jamie knew or remembered. It's a warning to parents everywhere. Hey, they are listening. Okay, here we go with Jamie Katuna, who currently is only a few minutes away from being a physician, and Keith Carlson of the Nurse Keith podcast.
What can a mother and daughter teach us about the practice of medicine and about leadership in the healthcare realms? Let's talk with physician, podcaster, and leadership expert Patty Fay and her daughter, fourth-year medical student Jamie Katuna, right here on episode 295 of the Nurse Keith Show. My first question to you, Jamie, is what's the first awesome thing that comes to mind when you think about having a physician mom who inspires you to think deeply about this career that you're just about to embark on as you finish your fourth year of medical school?
Well, I think you just said the awesome thing about having a physician mom who inspires me to deeply within my medical career. That's exactly it. That's the best part about having a physician mom. I do have classmates who are the first people in their family to go through medical school, and that's inspiring in its own right. The thing that I love about having a physician mother is sort of someone else who can walk that walk and kind of give me the ins and outs of the profession, and especially the way that she does it. She went through clinical medicine and then leadership, and she's a big advocate for physician autonomy and kind of cares about the big issues within healthcare. It's sort of planted that seed for me to care about those things. And it's kind of broadened my scope of the things that I think about within medicine. And so I don't feel like my journey through medicine will be as myopic as it would have otherwise without not intentionally guiding that journey, but by her own experience guiding that journey.
So in a sense, Jamie, you're saying like, rather than having a myopic view, a narrow view, your mom, to continue the metaphor of myopia, it's like she's giving you different lenses to look through at your new profession.
It would be so easy to go through medical school and medicine just focusing on the patients in front of you and learning the practice of medicine and learning about the care. Maybe 100 years ago, that would be a totally fair way to go through medicine. But I think in the industry that it has become, finances and financial structures matter, and who's leading the culture of medicine and who's leading the industry of medicine, that stuff matters. And reimbursement policies and direct primary care and just kind of all these things that I don't really know a way for medical students to know about them. I got really lucky about someone who cares about these topics and works within these topics right in my family. So yeah, definitely.
Right. You're lucky she gave birth to you. So it's like, it's great. It's perfect arrangement.
Set up perfectly for me.
So Patty, as the amazing woman who gave birth to an amazing daughter and having your own career in medicine, and we'll talk about your work in leadership development too. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about having this daughter who is a future medical colleague and peer.
I admire Jamie. I think that she is so special as a student, so driven to understand. She has so much, I think, intellectual curiosity, and then she can turn around and translate that for other people. She has really, I think, helped keep her dad, who's also a physician, and me up to date on things that she's fascinated about, and pointed us to podcasts and books and articles and a different way to interpret data. And she's even had some sympathy, I think, for us and the crazy things that we did maybe 15, 20 years ago when everything was different. I really admire that, just that intellectual drive that she has. And you mentioned her leadership, and that's probably the thing I would want to especially point to. With Jamie, it's like Nike, just do it. She jumps in. She'll put herself in harm's way in the interest of understanding something or leading something that's important to her. She gave a talk to a group of functional medicine folks at a convention, and she stood up in front of them and performed a spoken word. I just think that kind of courage to me is so impressive.
That's so true. And Jamie, you are courageous. And we first met on Instagram because I found your Instagram feed, Speak Out Medicine. And you were sharing some of your spoken word and also your journey through medical school. What I've noticed in your journey through social media and through your website is that you ask a lot of questions. You question a lot of what you see out there. And it's been fascinating, in your Instagram stories as well, just to watch the progression of your learning and also the challenges you've been through in school, the exhaustion, the amount of information that you need to soak up is absolutely astronomical. How are you feeling as you come to the close of your fourth year, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. I do think that is something that we talked about last time, where sort of like the popular conception of how people like to portray themselves on social media from within medicine is just nowhere near what the experience is really like. And so it is sometimes refreshing to see some people say like, this is really hard and this doesn't seem logical and this is inefficient. The people who I've been able to connect with on there kind of share that authenticity or honesty in their experience, which is kind of nice to have a group of people who don't want to sugarcoat it. I feel great being done with what I think is the most hazing part of medicine, maybe like the part that it's hard to connect with why it will be relevant in the future, which it definitely is. And we need to go through that. But there's something nice to know that what is in front of me is more clinical based or hospital based, where I'll be doing the things that I'll be doing in the future. So it's nice. And to be done with the board exams that are pretty mentally demanding.
I can't even imagine. I just can't even fathom it.
There's a great guy on Twitter, Carmody, I think. I can't remember his first name, who is just such a good advocate for medical students and kind of talking about the beast that the board exams have become and the application inflation. So like people used to apply to, 10 to 12 programs, the ones that they wanted to go to, but now people will be applying to 140 just because everyone's applying to 140. And so he really lays out that data in a way that kind of displays how ridiculous this process has become.
Is it KARMODY? I think I've come across.
KARMODY.
Yeah, we'll have to circle back about that. I note how you're so authentic about your life that you do try to have some fun and get out and actually see the world once in a while. You're headed towards emergency medicine, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. You got
and
it.
Patty, have you practiced emergency medicine?
I'm an internist.
So you're an internist. So have you tried to influence Jamie's choices around where she heads in medicine?
I love the fact that she is aiming for emergency medicine. I think that really suits her, and I think it's a great choice.
Jamie, what is it about emergency medicine, and did internal medicine call you at all during these last 4 years?
I was really impressed with how knowledgeable all the IM doctors were. I didn't love the flow of the day or the pace of it. I think I have really strong opinions about nutrition and chronic disease. And I kind of really do think so many things that ails us in this day and age is nutrition based. And I think I would have a hard time practicing a lot of things because I would want to relate them back to nutrition and prevention rather than disease management. I wouldn't believe in what I was doing. So emergency medicine was one of the only places where that wasn't as relevant, or it's not relevant. What comes in, you stabilize it quickly and do the job right there in front of you. And What I also love about emergency medicine is what we were talking about before. I think it opens up more time and space for me to pursue a bunch of other avenues that I'm really passionate about, like advocacy and leadership and nutrition even. And it has a concise schedule where it's shifts and you work the things that you need to work. It will give me an opportunity to practice medicine in a way that I believe in and that I like, and help me kind of come into different interests that are tangential to medicine as well.
I love that. Yeah. And to really dig into the nutritional and lifestyle aspects, you would need to practice in functional medicine or something where you can influence people more deeply. And that's it's a whole other area to go into.
Yeah. And have conversations and take your time and do a lot of teaching and education. And sort of my vision has been like, as an EM doc with like a small panel of my own patients who I practice kind of a more functional or nutrition-based type of medicine as well.
That sounds great. Sounds very prudent to kind of see if you can straddle both worlds. So, Patty, Jamie mentioned leadership, and you're a leadership expert in the realm of medicine and healthcare. And you work with people from all aspects of healthcare leadership, executives, physicians, etc. And Fay Consulting, it's a small organization, correct?
Right. I have one colleague, Lynn Elliott.
That's right.
She's the other half of our small but mighty firm.
That's right. And I saw her on the website, and you have a new podcast. I just listened to episode 9, which was really wonderful, with a woman who has been running Denver Health for some time. And it was a great conversation with her. When you think about medicine and you think about, let's say, Jamie coming into the medical world, how do you see leadership in the medical realms changing in the 21st century? What are the changes you are really looking at that you feel are essential right now?
I'd say the biggest focus that I have has been on fanning the flames of physician leadership, really encouraging my colleagues to pick up the mantle of leadership, to take on the leadership roles. And that's really the purpose of my podcast, is to talk about leadership and physician leadership and the importance of moving the people that have more of, I call it the BSM, the business school mindset, moving the folks with the BSM out of the top leadership roles, because it has such a pervasive and harmful effect on healthcare organizations. And the more research that I did on some of the business school training and mindset and managerialism, the more I believe it actually has a fairly toxic effect on our society in general, a lot of different institutions and structures. For me, the big thing is really getting clinical leadership in place, having physicians understand that the people in the organization are every bit as important as the patients that we are taking care of and that they are taking care of, and how critical it is to create a super organizational culture where people are not in a threat state and where they can bring their best thinking to work, where they can use their prefrontal cortex. It's not unplugged by having some tyrant at work, or if it's not a tyrant in a position of leadership, it can be the fact that physicians and nurses and others are treated like commodities, like we're interchangeable.
They're cannon fodder.
Yeah.
You just put them on the front lines and burn them out, and then you replace them with somebody else.
Well, I think that really became highly visible in the first few months of COVID, just how callous some of the leadership was. It was even shocking to me, and I have strong opinions about the need for us to have leadership that has a lot of understanding of the profession itself and has a lot of tacit knowledge of what's going on in healthcare that they can bring into the leadership position.
Yeah, and leadership and organizational culture are not mutually exclusive. They have to work hand in glove. In terms of your work and the ways in which you bring that work out into the world, on Twitter, you call yourself a maniac for great organizational culture. It sounds like through your podcast, License to Lead, you're leading physicians into this space of thinking of themselves as leaders. And like you said, taking the business school aspect out of healthcare leadership and bringing clinicians in. So when we're creating a culture like this, how do we bring physicians and other stakeholders in? We're coming from a lot of different places. So how do you knit this together when you're trying to create a cohesive culture?
I'd like to address your comment about the organizational culture and leadership, how they're linked. And I would probably even make a stronger statement there. I think the CEO determines the organizational culture. That's how strongly I see that connection. So the CEO is chosen usually by a board of directors, and then that individual has the ability to choose all of the top level leadership. Everybody in mahogany row is chosen by that CEO, and all of that trickles down to the rest of the organization. And if there's toxicity that's permitted, if the CEO or some of the folks on the team are tyrants, if they've got a dim view of humanity, if they don't know what they're doing, if they're incompetent, if they're placeholders who make a huge salary but are not competent, they're basically stealing from the organization. All of those things have a toxic impact and increase cynicism. And it's just a lot of resources that go to navigating around and through and dealing with toxic leaders. And you lose good people. So excellent people jump ship. The barnacles, people that don't have any place else to go, they have no options. They stick around and you get a downward spiral. You can't recruit. The reputation goes down the drain. And all of that one decision that the board makes, that CEO is really going to determine the future of the organization. And I think that's so critical to think about that and understand that.
We have to start with the top. We have to make good decisions. And then we have to create a culture kind of from the top down, but it can also be from the bottom up where those two ends meet and where we create a culture where there's cooperation and collaboration and thoughtfulness and a lack of toxicity.
Right.
What do we replace that toxicity with? Is it collaboration? Is it kindness? What is it that knits it all together then?
I always say that the greatest gift you can give to a high-performing physician or a high-performing technician or nurse is allowing them to work alongside other high performers. And so I think what can knit it together is a real belief in the mission of the organization, a belief that something wonderful can be accomplished for the other people in the organization and certainly for the patients and the community. And I like your idea about it coming from the bottom up as well, because I think it is possible for leaders in the middle of the organization to almost create a cone of protection. I think great leaders do that.
That's nice.
They might be dealing with toxicity from above, but they love their people. They love the patients. They know what the right thing to do is, and they protect their team from the toxicity. Then if you get a new CEO in, you get a new leadership team, then you can start to see those pieces come together. You've already got some excellent leaders that have created little clusters of a better organizational culture in spots in the organization. And then you can put in, systemic structures from the top.
Right. So it's like subcultures within the overarching culture. So Jamie, taking what your mom just said around that cone of protection, if you become an emergency medicine doctor in a big system and you're coming in as a new physician, how has all of this influenced you and how are you thinking about navigating? And I know you look at systems with a critical eye because of your videos and what I've read that you've written. What do you want to bring to the table when you emerge into this profession?
It's already influenced how much I care about it and where I would be going. So we've had preliminary interviews on some of my sub-internships in emergency medicine where the program director would get together with the 4 or 5 of us that were there at that time. And we could ask him questions and he would sell us on the program and that type of things. When he asked if there was any other questions, some of the other students saying what fellowships do you offer? And I was asking who is running your physician group? How do you guys get along with the administration? What was it like during COVID? Do you guys feel like you have autonomy? Really cutting questions where it almost felt like I was putting them off a little bit. I care about this stuff because I've been convinced how much it would really matter. And I would not want to go to a place that has hostile interactions with their administration and care a lot about a place that it's physician led or at least has someone in the leadership role that has clinical experience and can relate to the employees. But I do think about that cone of protection concept a lot, actually. And I'm sure as a resident, there's going to be a lot of times where I feel like my autonomy is threatened and I don't really like the rules that are imposed of me. But it sort of inspired me to maybe I can lead by example or be a type of leader who makes it at least better for the people around me, even if I'm in a position where I'm subservient to a lot of people, that at least I can do a little bit to make life less miserable. I can try to take on some leadership qualities, even if I'm not in an official leadership position.
Absolutely. Leaders happen in many different levels of an organization. There's CEOs who lead from the top down. They're servant leaders, or they lead from behind, right, Patty? I mean, there's all these different types of leaders. And Jamie, it sounds like you want to come in and be would you call it a change agent or a culture ambassador in a way of trying to bring something fresh into organizations?
I would love that. I like the concept of a culture ambassador, leading by example, calling out people who do the hierarchical thing with the other professions and stuff. Yeah, I think that would be great. And I think it would be self-serving too, because that would be the culture that I would actually want to be a part of. If I had an option to contribute to making that happen, I would certainly want to do that.
You know, that quote, we won't pejoratively name it a cliche, that quote that says, be the change you'd like to see in the world. So if you come into an organization and you want to see and be part of a culture that's positive and supportive and compassionate and empathic and functional, and you can actually model that for others, right?
Right. And I think what the advantage of having my mom's mindset around me is like, I kind of can know what to look out for. She has an acronym, CARB: clarity, autonomy, respect, and belonging, and what people act like when they don't have it. And so I can keep an eye out for that stuff. Or like, are people leaving? Are people complaining about leadership? Do people feel like they're doing a bunch of busy work that they don't want to be doing? And through her experience, knowing that like, it's not stagnant like that, like things can be done to change a culture around like that. It's not just like, oh, well, this is how medicine is. This is how residency is. There's something in the back of my brain that it's like this now, but it's not inherent to the culture of medicine.
I once wrote an article called The 7 Most Dangerous Words in Healthcare. That's the way we've always done it.
My mom used to have a magnet with that phrase on it. Exactly. Yeah.
Patty, based on what we were talking about leadership and about physicians, and you were also talking about attrition. Toxic cultures lead to attrition, and then we have shortages, and then we're short-staffed. What are some of your ideas, especially relating to physician leadership, that we can do so that we draw more people into medical practice and bring them into leadership roles? What can we actually do?
One of the concerns that people frequently raise with me is, Patty, how can you be talking about getting physicians into positions of leadership when we're facing a physician shortage? And for me, that's almost the biggest argument to make sure that we get physicians into positions of leadership so that they can manage the organization and have an impact on the organizational culture. There's a researcher, Amanda Goodall, who has done a number of studies and has really, in a way, ignited many other people to be looking at this, but she was the first one to take a look at kind of the results of physician leadership. She made the point that about 5% of organizations and healthcare systems and hospitals are run by physicians, 5 or 6%. But when you get to the U.S. News and World Report's top 100 hospitals, and there's hundreds of top 100 hospitals because they look at cancer and heart disease and GI and all that. When you look at those, 50% of the top 100 hospitals are led by physician CEOs. They have better outcomes. That's why they're on the list, on the top 100 lists. And other work that Goodall has done shows that when an organization is led by somebody who's an expert in the field, have expertise in the core business, it raises the morale, raises the outcomes for everybody. So the staff and employees are more likely to have increased autonomy. Physicians want the nurses to be really happy. And the better the nurses are, or the technicians, or whoever it might be, the happier they are, the more likely the high performers are to stay. It's a lot better for the physicians. I mean, it's absolutely important.
You should tell this story about Kelly.
Yeah. So I lived with an ICU RN for 4 years, and I stay in touch with her. And I actually run the podcast by her, see, what she thinks, what she makes of these perspectives. But Kelly was in an organization for almost 30 years. At one point, it was a crazy day in the ICU, and one of her colleagues asked her if she would transport a patient for her at the end of Kelly's shift. And she said, sure, she would help out. So she took the unstable patient down for some procedure and came back 40 minutes later and then clocked out. And the next day she got a disciplinary action against her. She got written up for clocking out 40 minutes late. And that's the sort of thing that is going to happen in an environment where the supervisor is not clinical, or if he or she is clinical, they're probably reporting to somebody who's got a business school mindset. And, they're just looking at the budget.
Mm-hmm.
And Kelly left the organization shortly thereafter, didn't she?
Yeah, she did.
That's how it kind of relates back to the physician shortage and then staffing shortages. It's like this heinous culture where, you get reprimanded for doing more than you were supposed to do. You get reprimanded. And so why would anybody stay in a culture like that? And to me, it makes so much sense that she would say my efforts, my generosity isn't being valued here. I'm leaving. I think physicians go through that same thing. There's all these organizations that advertise to physicians for these non-clinical jobs or non-medical jobs. And you can be a consultant to a TV show that uses medical stuff, all these things that are just helping people jump ship because of this ridiculous culture that is put in place by the business school mindset.
Well said. Yeah, the bean counters who are just watching, to use that pejorative, watching the numbers. And imagine if Kelly had done that and her colleague who she helped had gone to the manager and said, Kelly just went above and beyond. And then the manager over that manager came down and said, hey, Kelly, you really go the extra mile to help folks. And you really did something to help. And that unstable patient could have coded on your way down in the elevator and you would have been right there with that patient to help them and help save them.
Absolutely.
So imagine if it had turned upside down and Kelly had the opposite experience. And then she was writing on social media about what an incredible place I work for. I just did a little thing and they just took it and ran with it and said, what an amazing contribution I've made.
Right. And that's what I think physician leaders bring to the table. People who went through business school, they just don't have that understanding of everyone's role within the system and why they're important and why they benefit each other and why bean counting, like you said, is totally counter to the job that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Kelly had an ethical obligation, that's what her obligation is. And that's where her commitment was at the time and to her team. She'd made all the right decisions and was penalized for it.
And we see that so much. We lose such good people. A large portion of new nurses leave the profession within the first 2 to 3 years because they get beaten down. There's bullying, there's incivility. Why wouldn't we want to keep these people and beat back the attrition and retain people because we've invested in them? And then we want them to invest in us, right, Patty?
Yeah, I mean, it's an unbelievable amount of money that's left on the table. And that's a crass way to put it. But it also points to the incompetence of the people who have the managerialism mindset, the business school mindset, that they don't understand that they are making it impossible to have excellent financial outcomes even.
Yes.
But probably turnover of a physician is close to $1 million if you look at all the costs. And the turnover of a ICU RN is probably $500,000.
Most likely.
If you really look at all the ramifications, all the impact.
The reverberations of the attrition of one highly skilled expert person, right? That takes a lot to replace them. So, Jamie, you mentioned to me prior about your rotation in direct primary care. And you said that something about that rotation relates directly to what your mom talks about religiously, which is this notion of autonomy. What was your experience on that rotation? And is this a positive experience that relates, or is it a different story?
It's a really positive experience.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah. So it's a physician who is so industrious. So she left a hospital system that when I told my mom, who is familiar with that hospital system, which when she left, my mom said, oh, that place is evil. So she left a really apparently a very poor organizational culture, decided she wanted to work on her own. And just the level of autonomy that I've seen on her rotation is just incredible. She makes her own schedule. She meets all her patients before choosing if she wants to take them on as patients. She dispenses her own medications. She performs her own procedures. She does it all herself. She believes in herself. I think my mom is more like, let's transform cultures in organizations and industry and make sure that everyone in each of their, respective roles has the autonomy that they need to get done what they should be doing. The concept of autonomy, I think, is so important in both because it's needed for happiness and satisfaction at work. If you have any threat to autonomy, you want to leave and it feels threatening. So I think in both cases, it's really important. I think my mom is more like there's big systems that need to be reformed. And the physician I was working with is I can take the autonomy when it wasn't provided for me where I worked before.
Patty, have you been called on to lean in with any organizations that are specifically struggling vis-a-vis the COVID-19 pandemic? Are there even more things going on or things coming to light right now?
So during the COVID pandemic, I have been more in touch with clients by Zoom and by phone. The big things that I've been focusing on have been the podcast. So leveraging what I really believe in as far as the ways that we can make a difference with organizational cultures. I've been going organization by organization where at the end of last year, I thought it would be great to get this out there on a broader scale and have it more accessible. Some of the things that I'm concerned about and some of the ideas that I have, I would love to have it out there for a wider audience rather than just organization by organization. The researcher that I mentioned earlier, Amanda Goodall, is at the Cass Business School in London. And she reached out to me and asked if I would speak to her group of physicians at the Cass Business School. So I'll be giving a talk to them by Zoom.
Excellent.
Yeah. And then I've also had a group from the Middle East reach out to me and ask if I would do some leadership development and training virtually for a group of physicians that are from all over the world. It's been kind of a strange mix of doing my usual work in a different way and then also having some other opportunities that are pretty unusual that have cropped up.
COVID has brought to light some of the things that we knew were there, but now they're staring us right in the face. We can't deny them now.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so obvious. The mean-spirited approach in a lot of systems, the callous attitude towards frontline healthcare workers. It's devastating.
Jamie, in terms of COVID, we were just talking about your mom's work, how it's been affected by COVID. So how has that impacted how you look at this profession you've chosen?
It's been like both heartbreaking, but also inspiring. Like what a meaningful field to be a part of right now. All eyes are on healthcare in the world right now. And it matters. Like it's such a vacuum for people to come into and change what's going on.
What an intense time to launch a career as a doctor, as a nurse, as a social worker, as a CNA, whatever it happens to be. What a time to enter into this world.
Yeah, no kidding.
So Patty, you began as an internist. How long into your career was it that you started thinking like, I think I could have a bigger impact? Was that recent? When did that transition happen?
Yeah, pretty early in my career. So I was fairly satisfied with my internal medicine practice. I had wonderful patients, great colleagues, a fantastic medical assistant that I worked with. And then the leadership started putting in place some systemic changes. It had a huge impact on physicians and our practices, but we weren't included in the decision making.
Oh,
and I started to see some of my colleagues jump ship, basically, and people that I was invested in, I'd helped recruit. I noticed that my medical license was important in order to have the clinic open and advertise that internists are here to take care of patients. But I didn't have the autonomy or the authority that I needed to create a practice so that I could achieve the outcomes that I was responsible for. And that's probably the big soundbite as far as autonomy is everybody, whatever role they're in, we have to have a level of authority and autonomy to meet the accountabilities that are on our shoulders.
We do.
And that was something that I didn't have. So I thought I could either jump ship or get involved and then jump ship later if I couldn't make a difference. So I ended up running for the board, getting on the executive team and overseeing the strategic HR function in the organization. And really amazingly, we were able to make a huge difference in the physician satisfaction and in other outcomes. It was notable and really just launched me into being pretty fervent about wanting people to recognize that the organizational culture can be changed. It's really created at the top of the organization. And if it's toxic, it's important to tackle it at that level.
One last question for you, Patty. Tell me just a little bit this notion of your curriculum on neuroscience. How does this relate to all of it? Kind of put a bow on it with the neuroscience?
Yes. And I think Jamie did a great job The neuroscience is so important because our brains are wired basically to move away from threat and toward reward. It's true not only physically, but also socially or interpersonally. Mm-hmm. And so the acronym that Jamie referred to, CARB, captures 4 areas where we can be threatened or rewarded at work. And I think it's a really useful tool. So CARB is clarity, autonomy, respect, and belonging. Informal and formal leaders can really consider those 4 elements and make a change, make some significant changes in their behavior, in their structure, in how they interact with their staff and their teams. It can have a big impact.
That's great. So it's clarity, autonomy, respect, and belonging.
Right.
And Jamie, last question for you is what's next? When is your 4th year over first?
It's over June of 2021.
So once you finish your 4th year of medical school, you are then looking for
residency. So I'll apply to emergency medicine residency in October. Mm-hmm. I'll go through an interview season, and then in March, fingers crossed, match into a program that I'll start then in July 1st. So I'll choose where I apply. They'll choose if they want to interview me.
And that's interview season. That's what you're talking about.
Yep.
And then once you finish residency, just for any listeners who don't understand what happens then, is that when you enter the job market and you're looking for a job as an ER doctor?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That's very exciting.
Hello from the other side of that podcast, back in the Yucatan Peninsula. This is May of 2021, and to follow up on the very last topic there, Jamie did match into emergency medicine. She is headed to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where she had done a couple of rotations as a medical student, and I think she's officially thrilled with that outcome. A big thanks to Keith Carlson of the Nurse Keith podcast. He is not only an extremely experienced podcaster, providing a ton of great content, but he is a generous human being. He's so dedicated to connecting people and supporting people. I think he is a wonder. We'll give you all his contact information and all of Jamie Katuna's contact information so you can hunt them both down on social media and elsewhere, and it'll all be in the show notes. I'd be pleased as punch if, number 1, you'd sign up for the newsletter. You can go to my website, to the homepage, and find a way to do that. And number 2, if you would send me a comment or let me know some way that the podcast has affected you or something that you've done differently as a result, I'd just be over the moon to hear a few of those stories. Thanks so much. Happy May to everybody, and happy Mother's Day to all of you mothers. You know who you are.
Thanks for listening to the License to Lead podcast. Be sure to visit licensed2leadpodcast.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and sign up for our newsletter. Leave us a message with your provocative question or your thoughtful comments. You might inspire a future episode of the License to Lead podcast. Thanks so much, everyone.